Hello everyone. Sometime early last year, I read a book that really I didn't know what to do with. It fascinated me, befuddled me, and I knew I would have to read it again, and so I did. That book is The Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton. Chesterton is known as an author of many books on theology, books of philosophy, biographies that he wrote, and he also wrote crime novels, mystery novels, and this is a thriller, one could say, written in the early 20th century. And this book is one that is really challenging to talk about. It's challenging to review, because Chesterton does things in the first 20 pages of this book that technically you would consider to be a spoiler. Things are revealed very early on in this book that completely recontextualize how you saw this book. And yet it is hard to talk about this book with any sense of depth without spoiling literally the entire thing, things that are revealed in the very last chapter. It's hard to talk about the book in any substantial way. So what we're going to do here today is I'm just going to talk, and we're going to begin completely spoiler-free, no spoilers at all, and then as we go on, we're going to have a couple of spoiler warnings for moderate and then severe spoilers. So let's start off completely spoiler-free about what is The Man Who Was Thursday about. And obviously, I can't really tell you that, other than to say that the very beginning setup of this book is that we meet a man who's called Syme, and he approaches a person who's giving a very impassioned speech on a street corner one evening in Great Britain, once again, early 20th century. And the man is giving a speech in favor of the philosophy of anarchism and poetry, and how these two ideas are very much interlinked in his mind. And Syme challenges him on this, and the two start and have sort of a public argument. And then Syme thinks he's pretty well dismantled this man's ideas, and then the man approaches him later and says, "So you think I'm just some harmless person who spouts ideas but doesn't really act on them, do you? Let me show you." And he takes him into this secret lair and makes him swear to never reveal what he sees to the police, and shows that he is actually an anarchist who is a part of a secret organization that has been right under the government's nose, that has guns and bombs and all sorts of means of destruction and causing anarchy, and that they're planning something quite large. And that's really about all I can tell you about the plot, other than to say that the plot then takes off at a breakneck pace with twists and turns that you would no normal person would ever see coming. And the book, by the end of it, becomes so absurd, becomes so out there and bizarre, that it really does live up to its subtitle, which is The Man Who Was Thursday, A Nightmare. By the end of this book, it really does take on an absurd, dreamlike, nightmarish quality. This is an interesting read. It's an engaging read. It is very easy. Chesterton keeps the pace moving very quickly. But now we're going to get into a little bit more of talking about substantially what this book is about. So I'm going to offer a moderate spoiler warning. I'm not going to spoil much more other than the first 20, 30 pages or so. So you're going to be spoiled on the first big twist of the book. But I think it's worth it to give you all a good idea of why you should pick up this book and what makes it so engaging as the plot goes on. Because as this poet anarchist introduces Syme to the secret organization that he is a part of, he reveals that the head council, the head anarchist council, is led by a man named Sunday. He's called Sunday after the day of the week. And that the position of Thursday, the man who filled this position recently died, and it's empty. And this poet anarchist believes that, I think his name's Gregory believes that he will be the next person to fulfill the role of Thursday on the great anarchist council. At which point, Syme makes Gregory vow that he will never reveal a secret that Syme will present to the anarchists ever. And Gregory thinks that's only fair, and so he swears to that as well. And Syme reveals that he is actually a police officer who is now infiltrated, and that the police knew about this underground lair, and that Syme was just baiting Gregory to get him to reveal this eventually, so that he could entrap the anarchist council. And so Syme actually puts himself forward as a candidate for the role of Thursday. And the speech that he gives is so eloquent and so persuasive that the council votes in this undercover officer into the great anarchist council. And so Syme, the undercover cop, becomes Thursday. So that's why the book is called The Man Who Was Thursday. And so as the story goes on, Syme basically tries to figure out how to expose, without breaking his vow, his commitment to Gregory, how to expose the anarchist council, how to bring them to justice, how to thwart their plans, and especially this mysterious Sunday, Mr. Sunday, who runs the whole anarchist council. What is he really after? What is really going on here? And Syme, it ends up resulting in a chase across the country. They end up going to France. And once again, there's not much more I can say without reviewing some more big reveals as the story goes on. So we'll address a few of the big things that Chesterton is talking about. So Chesterton is similar to Tolkien and Lewis in that he was a devout man of faith. However, my understanding is that The Man Who Was Thursday was written at a time where Chesterton was not firmly a Catholic, that he wrote this as he was in the process of converting. And that really shows, because as much as this is a thriller and a crime novel, I muffed that word there, this also very much by the end takes on some deep allegorical meaning. I'm just muffling all my words here. It takes on a deep allegorical meaning about trying to discover a purpose to life. And you see that with the juxtaposition of the policeman, who represents a sense of order and structure, and the anarchists, who are the antithesis to that. And the policeman is working through the world of the anarchists. He sees a world of chaos and confusion in many ways, and is trying to make some sense of order out of that. And that's a question that Chesterton is exploring through the ideas of this book, but also, as it goes on, through the actual plot and story beats of this book as well. So that's another reason why you should read it, because it's fun, because it's engaging, because both times that I've read this, I've read it in under 24, 36 hours. It's very fast moving. But another reason why I have continued to recommend this book is for any fans of Gene Wolfe. Now, you do not need to be a Gene Wolfe fan to like this book. I actually think this book is much more accessible than much of Gene Wolfe's books. But Gene Wolfe famously was a big fan of Chesterton. And when you read Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun, you will notice that there are certain things that Chesterton does in The Man Who Was Thursday that you can really spot some of the similar DNA that Wolfe would have been pulling for in some of his bigger ideas related to the autarky and how the autarky works in the Book of the New Sun. So this is also a recommend for Wolfe fans. Even though this book is not strictly a fantasy novel, there's nothing supernatural or fantastical that happens in the sense that most of us would think of those terms, it's still as gripping and engaging as a fantasy novel, and often gets classified as such, and I'm not particularly sure why. So I'm going to end the moderate spoiler-free version of the video here and say you should read The Man Who Was Thursday because of the interesting ideas that Chesterton explores here, because of the influence that he's had on the science fiction and fantasy genre as well. Because this is a gripping mystery as the anarchist council gets exposed more and more as it goes along, and because Chesterton is also a very funny writer. He's a very witty writer. There are multiple passages in this book that made me audibly chuckle, and humor is a very hard thing to convey with the written word because you don't have timing or tone or inflection that you would if you were performing a comedy bit. So just Chesterton's wit and a clever turn of phrase is enough to make me chuckle. So it's a funny book as well. It's a brief read, it's a thought-provoking read, and I can guarantee you this, you will never read another book that is quite like this. As I said, by the end of it, the conclusions that this book comes to are so shocking that it boggles believability. It becomes absurdist. It becomes surreal by the end of the book. And there's no real way for me to describe that to you in any concrete way without getting into spoilers. So I'll say this, if you're not interested in reading this book at all, then listen to the spoiler portion, and even though some big parts of the book will have been already revealed to you, maybe it'll be enough to interest you. And if you're already interested in reading the book, then don't watch anymore. Come back and listen to this after you're done reading it. But don't watch anymore. Read the book for yourself. Have the many twists and turns. Let Chesterton pull you through the many twists and turns of this story, as it is well worth the very short read. But let's get into spoilers. So as Syme goes on throughout this book, he begins to learn one by one, as he encounters different members of the Anarchist Council, that actually each one of them are policemen undercover on the Anarchist Council itself. That there is no Grand Anarchist Council, there is only Sunday. Sunday is the leader of all of them. And that they've all been working independently, not knowing that each other was secretly cops in disguise, to subvert the anarchist works of Sunday, of the leader of them. They also learn, as time goes on, that they were all recruited by the same mysterious large man that recruited them all in a dark room once upon a time. So they've all been recruited by the same person, and they're all on this council, unbeknownst to them, all secretly undercover. And at the end of the book, we learn that Sunday, the leader of the Anarchist Council, is also the one who has recruited them all. So this whole big threat that they've been fighting against, this whole thing that they've been risking, and in their minds, life and limb, that has set them on a chase across country, across nations, this whole big panic to expose the Anarchist Council, has all been run by the same man who recruited them. And his name is Sunday. Now, if you've read Gene Wolfe, if you've read any literature with symbolic depth to it, you'll know that the naming of things is very important. And Sunday is, the day of the week Sunday, is often known just casually as the Lord's Day. It's known this for several reasons. One is because in the creation of the world account in the book of Genesis, this is the day of the week where God rested from all of his creation. So it's known as the Lord's Day for that. But also it is commonly attributed as being the day of the week that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And so that's why churches meet on Sunday, and Christians generally go to Mass or church or whenever on Sundays because of that. And so by the end of this book, I said it becomes surreal, and it becomes almost absurd, because it becomes very clear, you don't need to read in between the lines, that Chesterton begins to make this an allegorical equivalence by the end of the book, that Sunday becomes a sort of stand-in for God, both a source of many of the problems in the world, of much of the chaos of the world, and also a solution to many of the problems, a sense of order. And unlike Lewis, which many people find to be didactic, and many people find to be very on the nose when it comes to the allegory, because Chesterton wrote this at a time when he was working out his own faith, and he was trying to figure out what he believed in terms of his religion, his faith, the allegory comes across as much less clear. It's something that he wants to work out with you as the reader. He's not trying to tell you, here's all the answers. It's this is exactly how it works. Many of the questions are asked and left rather open in this book, which is a very interesting experience for a book that has such an allegorical ending. And I'm going to read you part of that ending. So, at the end of the book, all of the members of the Anarchist Council, supposedly, are brought together by Sunday to this large banquet ball in which he reveals himself in all of his grandeur, that he's the one who recruited them, that he's the one who orchestrated all of this. And I'm going to read you a portion of this, so bear with me here. Sunday says, "I sent you out to war. I sat in the commanding valor and an unnatural virtue. You heard the voice in the dark, and you never heard it again. The sun and heaven denied it, the earth and sky denied it, all human wisdom denied it, and when I met you in the daylight, I denied it myself." So you can hear even just in that a sense of the question of, I think that people call it the hiddenness problem with the nature of God. That if God is truly the creator and orchestrator of all that exists, why is he hidden? Why don't we see him more clearly? And Sunday makes a similar point there. Symes stirred sharply in his seat, but otherwise there was silence, and the incomprehensible went on. "But you were men. You did not forget your secret honor, though the whole cosmos turned an engine of torture to tear it out of you. I knew how near you were to hell. I know how you, Thursday, crossed swords with King Satan, and how you, Wednesday, named me in the hour without hope." So there, Sunday talks about how how they've endured, they've stayed true to their calling, how many of these men on the anarchist council would not reveal that they were policemen, took vows on the sacredness of their mothers' graves that they were not policemen, rather than expose the secret of who they truly were to people they believed to be anarchists. And it took the other members pulling out police cards saying, hey, look, we're policemen too, for them to finally concede, for them to finally reveal who they really were. So Sunday's referencing that here, says that they didn't forget this, that they were willing to go to death rather than betray the calling that they'd been given by, unbeknownst to them, by Sunday himself. There was complete silence in the starlit garden, and then the black-browed secretary, who's one of the members of the council, implacable, turned in his chair towards Sunday and said in a harsh voice, "Who and what are you?" "I am the Sabbath," said the other without moving. "I am the peace of God." The secretary started up and stood crushing his costly robe in his hand. "I know what you mean," he cried, and it is exactly that I cannot forgive you. I know you are contentment, optimism. What do they call the thing? An ultimate reconciliation? Well, I am not reconciled. If you were the man in the dark room, why were you also Sunday, an offense to the sunlight? If you were from the first our Father and our friend, why were you also our greatest enemy? We wept. We fled in terror. The iron entered into our souls, and you are the peace of God? Oh, I can forgive God his anger, though it destroyed nations, but I cannot forgive him his peace. I'll pause there for a moment. That reads to me as Chesterton writing in, once again, a common objection to the idea of God existing, to the idea that God could ever be loving. That's written in there of many people can understand God if he were wrathful or evil or angry God. They can accept that. But to look at the chaos of the world around us, the feeling that many people have, like God's let them down, or like maybe that he's turned his back on them, or even how people have expressed, and I've expressed this at times, the feeling that God has betrayed them, and then at the same time to have the audacity to claim that he is all good and all loving, the feeling is understandable of what the secretary expresses here. I could forgive God his anger, though it destroyed nations, but I cannot forgive him his peace. Sunday answered not a word, but very slowly he turned his face of stone upon Syme, as if asking a question. "No," said Syme, "I do not feel fierce like that. I am grateful to you, not only for wine and hospitality here, but for many a fine scamper and free fight. But I should like to know. My soul and heart are as happy and quiet here as this old garden, but my reason is still crying out, I should like to know." Sunday looked at Ratcliffe, another member of the council, whose clear voice said, "Seems so silly that you should have been both sides and fought yourself." Bull said, "I understand nothing, but I am happy. In fact, I am going to sleep." "I am not happy," said the professor with his head in his hands, "because I do not understand. You let me stray a little too near to hell." And then Goggle said, with the absolute simplicity of a child, "I wish I knew why I was hurt so much." And what Chesterton presents there is a plethora of common responses, once again, to the idea of God. Of some people will say that it seems silly, that it's like God is on both sides of the conflict. Really, what this is and it was in the back of my mind, and I didn't realize it until processing it here. This is in book form, this is in novel form, the argument of the book of Job, of how dare God make a bet with the devil over this man's life and his livelihood. And so there becomes this argument between Job and his friends over the nature of God and over who he is. And in a certain sense, all of them, Job included, get it wrong until God shows up at the end of the book of Job. And that's what this ending seems like in so many ways. Another, the professor saying, "I'm not happy because I don't understand. You let me stray a little too near to hell." sounds like something Job would have said. And the question that I think so many of us have asked about the world, and especially if you believe that God is all good, the character of Gogol says, "I wish I knew why I was hurt so much." Still Sunday said nothing, but only sat with his mighty chin upon his hand and gazed at the distance. Then at last he said, "I have heard your complaints in order, and here, I think, comes another to complain, and we will hear him also." And then the character of Gregory shows up, and Gregory says he's the real anarchist, and the character of Bull says, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them." And that's a direct quote from the book of Job, so I should have spotted it even sooner. And so Gregory is the real anarchist in this situation, and he approaches, and I apologize for all the reading here, but I think it's necessary to make the point. Once again, for those of you who have read this, then it's a discussion, and for those of you who haven't, it's to show just how fascinating, and I should say, if you have not read this, you will not believe me that the rest of the book is not like this. The rest of the book reads like a Sherlock Holmes-style thriller from the early 20th century, and it gets very metaphysical and weird at the end, and becomes a religious discussion thinly veiled in this metaphor of anarchists versus the police. And Gregory approaches the real anarchist, says that he hates them. Simon replies that he never hated Gregory. And then it says, "Then out of this unintelligible creature, the last thunders broke. 'You,' he cried, 'you never hated because you never lived. I know what you are, all of you, from first to last. You are the people in power. You are the police, the great, fat, smiling men in blue and buttons. You are the law, and you have never been broken. But is there a free soul alive that does not long to break you only because you have never been broken? We in revolt talk all kinds of nonsense, doubtless about this crime and that crime of the government. It is all folly. The only crime of the government is that it governs. The unpardonable sin of the supreme power is that it is supreme." And this sounds exactly like the argument of Satan from Paradise Lost. "I do not curse you for being cruel. I do not curse you, though I might, for being kind. I curse you for being safe. You sit in your chairs of stone and have never come down from them. You are the 7 angels of heaven, and you have had no troubles. Oh, I could forgive you for everything. You that rule all mankind, if I could feel for once that you had suffered for 1 hour a real agony such as I." And he goes on. And the passage and the discussion goes on until he asks, have you ever suffered? And as he goes on, Sunday arrives, or Sunday stands up. And what Sunday says is, "Can you drink of the cup that I drink of?" Which is a famous quote from Jesus of Nazareth, speaking to his disciples when his disciples say that they want to be seated at the table with him in his kingdom, on his right hand and at his left. And Jesus asks him, "Can you drink of the cup that I drink of and be baptized with the baptism of which I'm going to be baptized?" Which is certainly a reference to his torture and death, but also to the spiritual purification that he is going to be enacting, of his death for the redemption of mankind, his descent into hell, and to lead out of hell a host of captives, to lead them out of captivity, and the intense weight of being separated from God, which we see expressed in the Garden of Gethsemane, and what he says on the cross when he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The Apostle Paul writes about this and says that God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. I'll say this here as well, in case anybody's wondering about the ending to The Exorcist and thinks that maybe there's some ambiguity about who won in the end, God or Satan. That verse is the key to understanding Father Karras's decision at the end of The Exorcist as well. I read it recently, so it's on the brain. But The Man Who Is Thursday leaves us with a question rather than an answer. It leaves us with that question of, Can you drink of the cup that I drink of? And I think in the long run, this might end up being for many people, especially for the skeptic, for the doubter, for the one who's questioning, for the one who's restless at heart, might be a more effective read and a more effective allegory than, say, what Lewis did. So guys, if you haven't read The Man Who Was Thursday, I hope you do. If you have read it, let me know what you think of this. I'm sure there's things I missed. There's a lot that I could touch on in this. I could have an hour-long discussion about this very small book. It is so gripping, it is so interesting, and it works very well as just a straightforward thriller, but it also has some very interesting spiritual questions as well. Not necessarily answers, but spiritual questions. So, thank you guys for watching this. Sorry that I've gone on for rather a long time, but thanks for bearing with me. Take care.